What are your thoughts on the use of natural pest control methods, and how can homeowners make the switch to healthier pest control options?
Yeah, this is a tough one because it depends on the pest and depends on the location around the world. But you know, I found that you can pretty much use boric acid and diatomaceous earth to control pretty much any crawling pest that there might be or insect. The flying insects are a little bit more difficult to deal with, and so would things like rodents. But I'm a big believer that sometimes you have to take a step backwards to take two steps forwards. And while I would love to go with, natural, non-toxic materials in every application of my life, there are certain things that if you have a problem, you have to deal with it and deal with it as safely as you can. But I wouldn't skimp on the ideas, because if you're dealing with it for months and years down the road, who knows what other problems it's causing in the home, both with the home and with the health of the occupants. You just want to take care of it and move on.
Thank you. How do you address the issue of mold and other environmental toxins? And what steps can homeowners take to prevent these issues from arising in the first place?
Absolutely enormous topic, especially these days. I would say in the last few years, mold has become one of the most prevalent phone calls that I get. It used to be 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, 8 out of 10 people who booked an appointment with me would be talking about chemical sensitivities and chemical emissions. And now it's probably 6 or 7 out of 10 calling to talk about mold. And the reason is because we know more about it. And I think people are a little bit more aware of what it can do to your health. I think that the thought has been up until the last 5 years, you know what, mold is everywhere. We can't do anything about it. We just have to learn to live with it because mold is natural. Now, that is partially true. Mold is natural, mold is everywhere, and mold is outside at measurable amounts. But the mold that's dangerous for humans, the mold that can start to proliferate and actually colonize on the building materials of your home, like drywall, paper, and studs, can be not only detrimental to the home itself, but also extremely toxic to the occupants. As mold is being threatened by either losing its food source or an attempt to take care of it through the use of completely wrong materials like bleach. What will happen is mold will release mycotoxins, essentially as a cry for help. And those mycotoxins can be enormously bad for the everyday average person. And in the last several years, we've learned more about those toxicological effects. And I believe more people now are just willing to ask the question, like, hey, is this something I should look at? I should take care of. So how do people take care of it in their own homes? Well, in order for molds to colonize and become problematic, you need a food source. And that's typically either an organic material, and that can be something as simple as, again, drywall paper or wood studs. Or it could be what we all see from time to time in our main bathroom, where you get little spots of mold in the corners of the walls or in the ceiling. And that's because mold spores that are naturally in the air can attach to these food sources. And those would be dead skin cells and soap scum. And it just starts to grow because you always have what you need, which is a food source, warmth, and moisture. If you can get rid of the moisture in your home, or at least lower it below 50% relative humidity, and make sure that all the surfaces in your home are also low of moisture, then mold is not normally going to be very problematic inside of a house. There are exceptions, of course. But for the most part, what we can all do is keep our humidity down below 50%. Make sure you have good ventilation. I'm not talking about just fresh air coming from the outside, but air movement within the house. Make sure that you use an air purification system, whether it's portable purifiers in various rooms or a whole house filtration system. And always have the air handling system in your home running. Even if you have no need for heat or air conditioning, Today here in Wisconsin, it's a perfect 70 degrees and sunny, and all the windows are open in the house, which is great for air movement. But when you have to close those windows because it gets a little chilly at night or gets a little too warm, you want to make sure that the fan of your system is running to allow for air movement throughout the home, allow for purification of what goes through the ducts, and it also keeps corners of the rooms having stagnant air, and stagnant air is what mold really likes to thrive.
Mhm. Okay, thank you. And I think people, when they think of mold, the boogeyman of mold is black mold. Are there other kinds of molds? How do we recognize it? And then also, what are symptoms that people may feel, even if they don't see the mold, but but if they know these symptoms, they may suspect mold and look into it?
Sure. Yes, there are many more molds besides just black mold. Black mold, what we all kind of think about is what's called Stachybotrys, which is one that can happen when you have, again, lots of moisture, typically in an area like a cavity wall or behind the drywall, where moisture is constantly feeding the mold and the food source, and it actually starts to break apart the wood. It eats away at the wood itself. The mold that we commonly see is not toxic black mold. The mold we not normally see is a little bit more of a common, and there's hundreds, if not thousands, of species that we can find in our homes. Matter of fact, some of the species we find in our homes are, I wouldn't say harmless, but they don't actually produce things like mycotoxins, but they can still trigger allergies and asthma. So what happens when somebody walks into a space that has mold? Well, it depends on your level of sensitivity, of course. If somebody who has been poisoned by mold in the past, and they actually have what's called chronic inflammation response, they can walk into a home and almost instantaneously tell you that there's mold in the house, because they will feel it in all of their nerves. They'll feel it, whether it's tingling of the fingers, whether it's an instant headache, even having blurred vision, all the way to worse, anaphylactic shock could be triggered by exposure to mold. The average person who doesn't have that serious of an issue, who's exposed to mold in their home, could just feel like this general malaise, flu-like symptoms, upset stomach, headache, and then once mold becomes part of the body, you can actually have mold mycotoxins within your body. And now that can be caused either from the building environment, or the built environment around you, or it can be caused by your food source. And there's lots of research that's coming out now that is showing that mold in the body is more predominantly from your food source than the building materials. But I've yet to see any definitive study that proves otherwise. So we always would err on the safe side. And if you do have mold mycotoxins in your body, you have to look at all aspects of living to see where possibly could be coming from.
And if I understood you correctly, did you say bleach was not a good way to remediate mold?
No, bleach is not a good way at all. So I know that's what a lot of people commonly use: bleach or vinegar or hydrogen peroxide. These materials, what they'll do is so let me step back. Some people call mold, and they call mildew, like it's a different type of product. Mildew is essentially mold. Mildew is mold that just hasn't had a chance to really grow roots yet. All right. So mildew is what we normally see like in a bathroom, where it's just a superficial area or patch of a discoloring, because again, you have dead skin cells and soap scum stuck to the wall, and that you can wipe off with a bleach, or better yet, just use hot water and a surfactant cleaner. You don't necessarily need something like bleach, because it's going to come right off. Once it's begun to sort of take root, if you use bleach, what'll happen is it'll take away the color of the mold, but it won't kill the roots of it. and it'll continue to grow. And when it comes back, it'll come back stronger. And so if you believe that mold has taken root, do not use something that'll just clean the surface and take away that color. But you really need to do more investigation to find out if you even can kill it from the surface, or do you have to cut out the drywall or cut out the wood and replace it? Because at some point, it's not fixable by just a simple cleaning.
Okay. All right. That makes sense. So, changing the topic from mold, how do you approach the issue of electromagnetic radiation in the home, and what steps can homeowners take to reduce their exposure to EMF?
So I know there are some really, really good experts on this topic that usually when it gets to be a situation where it's really involved, I'll bring in an expert to specifically talk about that, because these are folks that I know from the Building Biology Institute, and they are electrical engineers, and I'm not an electrical engineer whatsoever. But I can tell you that the biggest problem we have in our homes right now from an EMF standpoint would be from Wi-Fi, from things like, cell towers and so forth. These are more problematic because they have an ability to travel much farther and to penetrate walls and penetrate into the cells of your body. And so usually I'll have to find out and let's say I had a client that called up and we're helping them design a new home to be completely healthy. And the topic of EMFs will come up and they'll say, we're concerned about it, but we don't have any acute situations with it right now. What can we do to limit our exposure? Well, the first thing I'll do is ask them to hire a building biologist who's in their area to literally walk around the land with a handheld meter to see if they can locate, what direction the cell tower might be and where it's coming from. And then as we design the home, we can put in barriers within the walls. There are some mesh materials, some fabric materials that we can use behind the drywall. So those magnetic or those RF waves won't come through the walls. Then you got to deal with the windows, because there's a real chance that a higher amount can come through the window. So there are films you can use. Then we have to think about what elevation of the home it is and what's right behind that wall. If it's a bedroom, we really need to be concerned, and we really need to block those waves. If it's a utility room or a garage, an area where you're really not there quite often, or as much as a bedroom, we're not as concerned about it. From a standpoint of electromagnetic field, because of wiring, because of appliances and so forth, this is where we're getting into addressing the dirty electricity that's found in alternating current that supplies our homes. And that can be taken care of through the use of filters. You can also do whole house grounding to eliminate some of that dirty electricity. And then even more, I would say, simple things such as the use of kill switches in the bedrooms, where it literally shuts the power down all around the bedroom at night, so that there is no possibility that EMF coming from the wiring could harm you and cause disruption to REM sleep.
And there are some products on the market that claim to be able to block the EMFs, like they kind of radiate their own signal. I'm not exactly sure how they work. I don't know if you've heard of these types of products. And they make personal versions, they make whole house versions. Have you heard of them, and do they work?
I've heard of them. I haven't heard much success with them in real life application. There are other things out there that are plugged into outlets throughout your home. I believe they're called Stetzerizers, Stetzerizer filters, and that does a good job in reducing or eliminating dirty electricity. But these are things that I would recommend if you wanted to have this addressed in your home, that you do find a building biologist that knows how to address this properly. I've seen situations where people end up using way too many of these filters, and there can be a detrimental effect, as well as utilizing these other sort of new concepts of these personal devices that really in practical sense just really don't work.
Thank you. And what are your thoughts on the use of household or house plants to promote healthy indoor air quality? And which plants do you recommend that homeowners use?
I think the use of plants is smart. Um, I'm in favor of using any tool we have at our disposal to make our homes indoor air quality better. However, this is another situation where there can be too much of a good thing. And what I mean by that is I know people who end up putting half a dozen plants in every room, and then you end up with a mold problem in your house because you have all this soil. That soil naturally contains mold spores, and the home itself stays at a higher humidity because of all the watering. There's more mold spores, and it ends up becoming more problematic. So I think you have to use everything sort of uh, in limitation. I don't know specific plants. I know that ferns have always been ones that have been high on the list for good indoor air quality. Basically, any plant that has lots of little leaves, any house plant with lots of little leaves is good for this because there's more surface area to breathe essentially. So, but beyond that, just limit them because you could cause other problems.